Thanksgiving night in Dayton. My father raised his glass and said, "Some make us proud, and some just take up space." The table roared with laughter. I didn't argue. I just said, "Good. I just bought my own space. It's 3,000 miles away." They thought I was kidding, until I put the deed for an old cannery in Kodiak, Alaska on the living room TV. The room went dead silent. I smiled for the first time in years. My name is London Nguyen, and for the first 22 years of my life, I was an error in the code, a rounding error in my family's perfect equation. We lived in Dayton, Ohio, not just any part of Dayton, but the kind of suburb you see in commercials for lawnmowers or life insurance. Our street was a silent, manicured shrine to the American model. The lawns were all cut to an identical 2 inches, a flat, green carpet unrolled between identical driveways. The American flags were hung in their prescribed brackets, perfectly aligned, stirring only in a breeze that seemed to respect the property lines. Our house was the centerpiece, a large colonial-style box that my father, Gerald, referred to as a statement of principles. Our family was the living embodiment of those principles. On the surface, we were the perfect print ad. My father, Gerald, was the patriarch, a man who worked in finance and believed that volume, both in his voice and his presence, was a substitute for thought. My mother, Patrice, was the silent, graceful enabler, a woman so terrified of discord that she had erased her own personality to become a better reflector of his. And then there was Cole. My brother, Cole, was the star player. His entire identity was forged in the holy trinity of high school, college, and potential pro football. He was loud, confident, and effortlessly cruel in the way that only true golden boys can be. His victories were our family's religion, his trophies were our icons, and his future was the only one that mattered. And then, there was me. London Nguyen, the quiet, dark-haired, insignificant daughter, the afterthought. I didn't play sports. I didn't join the cheerleading squad. I built circuit boards in the garage and read books on systems theory. I was the small, quiet glitch in their perfect, all-American program. The center of our universe, the altar where our family's religion was practiced every night, was the dining room table. It was a massive, dark cherry wood table. Built to seat 8, my father, Gerald, always sat at the head. It was not a chair, it was a throne. From there, he directed the flow of conversation, passed judgment, and surveyed his domain. My mother sat at the opposite end, the foot, her role to act as a servant, to anticipate his needs before he had to voice them. Cole sat at our father's right hand, the place of honor, the heir. My seat was at the other end, next to my mother. But it was not just a seat. It was a physical manifestation of my place in the system. The dining room was slightly too small for the massive table, and on my side, it was crammed up against an enormous, dark, and looming china cabinet. My chair was permanently angled, wedged into the corner. To sit, I had to turn sideways and slide in. My view was not of the family, but of the cabinet's carved wooden leg in the wall. I spent every meal of my life with my shoulder an inch from a piece of furniture, physically marginalized, taking up as little space as possible. This Thanksgiving was no different. The performance was in full swing. The house smelled overwhelmingly of sage, roasting turkey, and my mother's anxious, expensive perfume. The table was groaning under the weight of a feast that looked like a magazine cover. The china was out, the silver was polished, and Cole was loudly retelling a story about a college game that had already been retold a dozen times. I sat in my corner, my knees pressed against the table leg, my body angled away from the group. I was a quiet observer, a ghost at the feast. I ate my food, listening to the familiar, booming rhythm of my father's laughter and the sharp, agreeing echoes from my brother. My mother was a silent blur, floating from kitchen to table, her face set in a tight, placating smile. The meal wound down, the wine had been flowing. Gerald, his face ruddy from the alcohol and his own self-importance, pushed his chair back slightly. He picked up his glass. The room, as it always did, went silent. It was time for the toast. He raised his glass. "To another successful year," he boomed, his voice filling the room. "To family, to a home built on strong foundations." He nodded at Cole, his smile widening. "To sons who make their fathers proud." Cole raised his glass. "To you, Dad?" Gerald took a sip, his eyes scanning the table. He was enjoying his power. His gaze drifted past my mother, past my aunt who had come, and then it landed on me. It landed on me, wedged in my corner by the cabinet. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes changed. They became heavier, dismissive. He continued, his voice slowing for effect. "It's a wonderful thing. A family. You have those who build it up, who make us proud." He nodded at Cole again. "And then, you have those who just take up space." The words hung in the air, a perfectly executed, brutal, and public assessment. And then, the laughter. It started with Cole, who let out a loud, sharp laugh. My aunt, eager to please, chimed in with a nervous giggle. My mother's tight smile just froze, her eyes darting to the centerpiece, and my father chuckled, a low, satisfied sound. It was not a joke, it was a culling. It was the system identifying the error, the useless component, and laughing at it. My blood didn't just run cold. It stopped. It froze in my veins. A sudden, agonizing crystallization. I could feel the cold starting in my chest and spreading to my fingertips. I looked down at my plate, at the half-eaten slice of turkey. I felt, for 1 second, like I was going to be physically sick. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not look up. Instead, I slipped my hand into the pocket of my dress. My phone was there. My refuge. My one connection to a system that made sense. My fingers, numb and cold, slid the phone out and brought it up under the lip of the table, shielding the screen with my napkin. My father was still talking, launching into another story about Cole's bright future. The laughter had subsided, but the echo of it was still in my ears, in my blood. I unlocked the screen. The light was a small, secret blue in my lap. I opened an app, not a social media app, a secure document server. For the last 6 months, I had been building my own system, in secret. While they laughed about football, I had been studying maritime law, structural engineering reports, and Alaskan fishing territories. While they were building Cole's future, I was liquidating every stock my grandmother had left me, every bond, every asset I had spent the last 4 years accumulating from my remote coding work. A single document was waiting for me, a final purchase agreement. It was for a derelict, collapsing, beautiful old fish cannery in Kodiak, Alaska, a place 3,000 miles away, a place that was nothing but space. My father's voice droned on. "And when you're the quarterback, you have to be decisive. You have to." I scrolled to the last page of the document, the final price, the closing terms. Everything was in order. My lawyer had approved it that morning. At 6 a.m., I just had to execute. My thumb hovered over the digital signature line. London, Nguyen. I heard my father laugh again. My blood was so cold it was burning. I pressed my thumb to the screen. I authorized the transfer. I confirmed the signature. A small, digital checkmark appeared. Transaction complete. I had just spent every penny I had on a ruin on the other side of the ocean. I owned a building on a misty, frozen bay. I looked up. My father had just finished his story. The room was quiet again. The brief pause between monologues. He was looking at me, an expression of mild annoyance on his face, as if he had just noticed I was still there. "London, you've been quiet all night," he said, not as an invitation, but as an accusation. "Something on your mind, or just happy to be here?" Cole snorted. "She's just taking up space. Dad, let her be." The coldness in my veins turned into something else, something hard, something clean, like steel. I placed my phone on the table, face up. The white screen with the green checkmark glowed against the dark cherry wood. I looked at my father. I looked at my brother. I looked at the whole, perfect, terrible system. My voice, when it came out, was not a shout. It was not a cry. It was barely a whisper. It was as quiet as I had been my entire life. But this time, it was sharp. "I don't need anyone's space anymore," I said, my voice cutting through the warm, overfed air. "I just bought my own." The silence that fell was not like the silences before. This was not a pause. This was a system crash. This was a vacuum. I heard, with perfect clarity, my aunt's fork clatter against her china plate. I heard my mother make a small, choking sound, a gasp that got caught in her throat. My father stared at me. His smile was gone. His face was a mask of pure, uncomprehending confusion. Cole was the first to reboot. His confusion turned, as it always did, to aggression. His face darkened. "What did you just say?" he growled. "What the hell are you talking about? Bought your own what? A new laptop?" I didn't answer him. I picked up my phone. I swiped from the document to my photo gallery. I had one picture saved, the one from the real estate listing. "And where the hell is Kodiak?" Cole demanded, his voice rising, sensing a loss of control. I tapped the screen. I hit the cast button. Our living room, visible from the dining room, had a massive 75-inch flat-screen television, the one they had bought to watch Cole's games in full, glorious high definition. It was connected to our Wi-Fi. The television screen, which had been black, flickered to life. And there it was. It wasn't a pretty picture. It was a bleak, beautiful, and terrifying image. A massive, gray, wooden building sagging on its pilings over a churning, black-green bay. The mountains behind it were invisible, shrouded in a thick, wet, silver mist. The paint was peeling. The windows were broken. It was the most magnificent thing I had ever seen. I left the image on the screen. It dominated the house. This picture of my decay, my freedom. I turned back to the table. Cole was staring at the TV, his mouth open. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. And my father? Gerald, the patriarch, the king, the head of the table. He was staring at the image on the television. His wine glass was frozen halfway to his mouth. His face was pale. The words, the arrogance, the easy booming authority, it was all gone, wiped clean. He looked at the picture of my ruin. He looked at me, sitting in my cramped, ignored seat. And for the first in his life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. My childhood home in Dayton was a church, and the religion was Cole. Our hallway was the high altar. It was paneled in dark, glossy wood that my mother, Patrice, polished every Saturday morning. The shine was not for aesthetics. It was to properly reflect the glittering pantheon of Cole's achievements. Shelves, strategically reinforced by my father, Gerald, lined the walls. They started low, with Cole's first participant ribbon from a t-ball tournament, and climbed upward toward the vaulted ceiling, tracking his ascent. There were brass plaques from Pee Wee football, gleaming silver cups from junior high track, and heavy faux marble trophies from every conceivable high school victory. Most valuable player, district champion, state qualifier. The air in the hallway smelled perpetually of wood polish and metal. It was the scent of victory. My name was in the house, too. It was on a small, laminated piece of paper. My name written in my mother's careful cursive, stuck to the side of the refrigerator with a chipped banana-shaped magnet. It held the school lunch menu for the week. That was my space. Not a shelf, but a magnetic clip in the kitchen, where the air smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. I tried, once, to build a shelf of my own. When I was 10 years old, I won the district science fair. Not a participant ribbon. I won. First place. My project was about harmonic resonance. I had spent 3 months in the garage, vibrating different materials with sound frequencies, meticulously logging when they would shatter. It was 3 months of glorious, focused noise. A rare time I was allowed to be loud, because no one understood what I was doing. My trifold display board was perfect. My graphs were hand-drawn in 3 colors of ink. When the judges, 2 engineers from the local airbase, pinned the blue ribbon to my board, my heart vibrated so hard I thought it might shatter, too. I carried that ribbon home like it was an Olympic medal. I walked into the living room, where Gerald was watching a pre-game analysis and Cole was cleaning the mud from his cleats. "I won," I said. My voice was too high, too thin. Gerald didn't look away from the television. "Won what, kiddo?" "The science fair. The whole district." I held up the ribbon. It was wide, made of deep blue satin. He squinted at it. "Well, isn't that cute?" he grunted, then nodded toward my brother. "That's nice. Now go help Cole get his gear ready. He's got the semifinals, and he needs your support. Go on. Go cheer for your brother." The words didn't sting. They numbed. The vibration in my chest stopped. I felt the blue ribbon go limp in my hand. Just a piece of cloth. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and watched Cole from the window as he practiced drills in the backyard. I never mentioned the science fair again. The ribbon ended up in a shoebox under my bed, along with the shattered pieces of glass from my experiments. My birthday was in late October. It was always a quiet affair. This was, my mother explained, because it was too cold for an outdoor party and too close to the holidays for people to be bothered. My celebration consisted of a vanilla sheet cake from the grocery store. My mother would slice it, hand me a piece on a paper napkin, and that was it. No song. Often, no candles. It was an administrative event, a box to be checked in the family calendar. Exactly 1 week later was Cole's birthday. For Cole, the entire neighborhood mobilized. His birthday, in early November, was an event. The garage doors were thrown open. The patio heaters were fired up. My father would spend 2 days smoking a brisket, kegs of beer for the adults, coolers of soda for the kids, and a 3-layer custom cake from a real bakery. The entire yard would be full of noise, laughter, and the smell of barbecue smoke. The whole high school football team would be there, crushing soda cans, their laughter booming across the lawn. I would watch from my bedroom window, a ghost in my own home, listening to my father's loud, proud laugh as he retold stories of Cole's latest game. I would eat my leftover, dry piece of vanilla cake from the week before and understand, with the cold clarity of a child, what family meant. Family meant them. It meant Gerald, Patrice, and Cole. It was a perfect 3-piece set. I was the extra, the mismatched saucer that didn't go with the cups, kept in the back of the cabinet in case something broke. This was never more obvious than at dinner. Our dining table sat 8. Gerald, naturally, sat at the head. Patrice sat at the foot, the hostess position, though her primary role was to act as a conduit, fetching things from the kitchen so Gerald wouldn't have to pause his monologues. Cole sat at our father's right hand, the place of honor. I was kept at the kids' table in the breakfast nook until I was 17 years old. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a punishment. It was a fact. At 10, it made sense. At 13, it was embarrassing. At 16, when I was legally old enough to drive a car, I was still sitting at a small, formica-topped card table, my knees jammed against the flimsy metal legs, eating from a plastic plate while Cole and his friends discussed prom dates at the main table. "She's not a child." My grandmother Lillian, my father's mother, had snapped at him during one of her rare visits. "Let the girl sit at the table." Gerald had just smiled his tight, polite smile. "She's fine where she is. Ma, she likes the quiet." I never liked the quiet. I had just learned to live in it. My mother, Patrice, was not a cruel woman. She was just a terrified one. She existed in a state of preemptive surrender, her entire life calibrated to avoid aggravating my father. She was a gentle, anxious shadow who saw my invisibility not as a cruelty, but as a kindness. If I was unseen, I could not be a target. She was the one who taught me, in small, unspoken ways, how to survive, how to walk softly, heel to toe, so the old hardwood floors wouldn't creak, how to speak in a moderate, uninflected tone that would never be mistaken for talking back, She taught me how to nurse a single glass of water through an entire meal so I wouldn't have to ask for a refill. She taught me to be small, to be silent, to take up as little space as possible. She was afraid of my father's anger, a low-pressure system that lived in our house, and I, in turn, became afraid of my mother's fear. I saw how it hollowed her out, and I promised myself it would not hollow me. So I retreated. My sanctuary was the garage. It was cold in the winter and suffocating in the summer, and it smelled of gasoline, fertilizer, and rust. It was the only place in the house that was not dedicated to Cole. His trophies stopped at the door. In the back, under a pile of grease-stained rags and old tires, I found it. It was a large, heavy tabletop radio from the 1950s. Its wooden veneer was peeling, and the power cord had been chewed through by mice. It was broken. It was silent. It was perfect. That radio became my first real friend. I would sit with it for hours after school, while Cole was at practice and my father was at work. I downloaded schematics from the library computer. I saved my lunch money for 3 months to buy a soldering iron and a spool of silver wire. I learned to read the intricate maps of its circuits. I learned the smell of hot dust on vacuum tubes. I took it apart and put it back together a dozen times. My hands, which were clumsy and useless when holding a football, became steady and sure. My fingers, too small to grip a bat, were perfect for navigating the delicate pathways of a circuit board. I was fixing it. I was fixing something. One Tuesday evening, 6 months after I started, it happened. I made the final connection. I plugged in the new cord. I turned the Bakelite knob. A low, warm hum filled the garage. I turned the dial, and through a cloud of static, a sound emerged. It was a saxophone, playing a long, mournful note. It was a jazz station from a college campus 60 miles away. I sat on the cold concrete floor and listened to that saxophone. I had fixed it. I had taken something broken and silent, and I had given it a voice. I had made it speak. I was so lost in the music that I didn't hear the garage door open. My father stood there, silhouetted against the driveway, his briefcase in his hand. He looked at me, then at the radio. The jazz music felt suddenly loud, intrusive, and wrong. I tensed, waiting for the yell, waiting for the complaint about the noise, the smell of solder, the waste of electricity. He just sighed, a deep, weary sigh. He loosened his tie. "London, turn that thing down. Don't bother your brother. He's got a big test tomorrow and he needs to concentrate." He didn't ask what it was. He didn't ask how I did it. He didn't acknowledge the miracle of sound I had coaxed from a box of dead wires. My achievement was registered only as a potential inconvenience to Cole. He closed the door to the house, and I was left in the garage with the saxophone. I didn't turn it off. I turned it up. That was the night I made my vow. It wasn't a dramatic, spoken oath. It was a quiet, cold realization. It was a hardening in my chest. They would never see me. Not as long as I was in their house, playing by their rules. They were blind to the person who sat at their table, and they were deaf to the music I could make. Fine. If they would not see me, I would build something they could not ignore. If they would not give me a space at their table, I would build a table so large, so strong, and so far away that their small, polished world would rattle from the echo. Patience and precision, that was what the radio taught me. You cannot rush a repair. You cannot force a connection. You have to be meticulous. You have to be quiet. You have to trace the fault lines, find the break, and apply steady, deliberate pressure until the connection holds. My quietness was no longer an act of survival. It became an act of preparation. My meticulous nature was not a personality quirk. It was my language. It was how I would write my way out. I stopped trying to be seen. I started to plan. I gathered my data. I traced their circuits. I learned their wiring. And I waited, patiently, for the precise moment to turn the power on. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a day of suffocating, humid stillness in Dayton. The mail truck's whining gearbox was the only sound on the street. I was sitting on the porch steps, shielded from the sun, tracing the cracks in the concrete. When the red, white, and blue truck pulled away, a single envelope sat in the box. It was not a bill. It was not a catalog. It was thick, cream-colored, and heavy. The paper stock felt impossibly expensive. In the top left corner, it said, Ridgeway Institute, Office of Admissions. My hands were sweating. I took it to the kitchen, slit the top open with a paring knife, my movements careful, precise. I slid out the contents. Dear Ms. Nguyen, we are pleased to offer you admission to the Systems Optimization Program. I read the words 3 times. They were a foreign language. Full academic scholarship, including room and board. A full ride. Not a penny required from them. I waited until dinner. The table was set with its usual, crushing perfection. The pot roast was centered. The gravy boat was full. Cole was detailing a minor victory from football practice. I waited for a pause in the chewing. I placed the letter on the table, next to my father's plate, on the white linen napkin. He finished his bite. He wiped his mouth. He picked up the letter. His eyes scanned it, his brow furrowing. He read it again, slower this time. The silence at the table stretched, thin and sharp. Even Cole stopped talking. My father placed the letter back on the table, pushing it slightly toward the floral centerpiece. He picked up his fork. It's in Massachusetts, he said, as if stating a logistical fact, like a road closure. Yes, I said. He took another bite, chewed, swallowed. That's awful far. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, his eyes flat and cold. He was not assessing my future. He was assessing a risk. You'll regret it. You won't know anyone. You'll be back in 6 months, hat in hand. It's a foolish decision. From the other end of the table, Cole grunted. Isn't that a nerd school? What are you going to optimize? He laughed at his own joke. My mother, Patrice, just stood up. Her movements were stiff. Who wants more potatoes? She asked the empty air. She began clearing the plates, her eyes fixed on the remaining roast, on the pattern of the china, on anything but the thick, cream-colored envelope that represented my entire life. There was no congratulations. There was no, we're proud of you. There was no discussion. There was no party. There was no hug. My escape velocity had been calculated, my trajectory analyzed. The system had deemed it a bad investment. The scholarship covered tuition. It covered the room. It covered the board. But it did not cover the $300 for a one-way plane ticket. It did not cover the textbooks. It did not cover a winter coat capable of surviving a New England winter, something I had only ever read about. When I asked, Gerald just laughed. You're the one who wants to go to this ridiculous place. You figure it out. This is your foolish choice. So I became a machine. I worked 3 jobs that summer. I was a ghost in my own house, a vapor that only condensed to sleep for 4 hours a night. From 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., I stocked shelves at the local grocery, my fingers going numb as I organized the frozen vegetables, the methodical stacking, the inventory lists, the cold, fluorescent silence. It was almost peaceful. From 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., I worked at the public library, reshelving books, the smell of old paper and floor wax becoming a comfort. I was silent. I was invisible. I was efficient. From 5 p.m. until midnight, I washed dishes at a 24-hour diner off the highway. My hands were perpetually chapped, raw, and smelled of industrial bleach and old coffee. I stood in the steam, scrubbing pans, listening to the muffled sounds of the jukebox, saving every single dollar. I was a system, optimizing for one output, escape. I saved $350. I bought the one-way ticket online. I bought a second-hand suitcase, and I packed my old radio. The morning I left, the house was dark. 4 a.m., the air was cold. I carried my suitcase downstairs, my steps heel to toe, just as I'd been taught, making no sound on the hardwood. My mother was waiting by the front door. She was a silhouette in her thin robe, clutching a mug of coffee I knew she hadn't touched. She looked small and terrified. "Call when you land," she whispered. I nodded. I waited for her to look at me, but she couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the door handle, on the porch light, on the street outside. She was looking anywhere but at my face. She was afraid. Afraid of Gerald waking up. Afraid of the finality. Afraid of the silence I would leave, and the much larger, heavier silence that would remain. She didn't hug me. She didn't say, "I love you." She just opened the door. "Be safe." I stepped out onto the porch. The taxi I'd called was waiting at the curb. Its lights off. I walked away. I did not look back. The Dayton airport was sterile and gray. As the plane lifted off the runway, breaking through the low, oppressive Ohio cloud cover, I felt the wheels retract into the belly of the plane. I felt a lurch, a sudden, violent release. It was not joy. It was the sharp, agonizing relief of a leg pulling free from a steel trap. I was free, but I was also bleeding. Ridgeway Institute was a different universe. The campus was old, brick and ivy, and it was drowning in light. It was move-in day. The grounds were swarming with families. Everywhere I looked, fathers were carrying mini fridges, their faces red with exertion and pride. Mothers were smoothing bedspreads, fighting back tears. Whole families, brothers and sisters, were unloading SUVs, laughing, arguing, existing together. I watched a father lift his daughter in a massive bear hug, spinning her around on the sidewalk. I saw a mother adjust her son's collar, her hands lingering on his shoulder. I stood on the curb, alone, with my one cheap suitcase and a cardboard box containing my radio. The weight of my solitude was a physical thing. It was heavier than the suitcase. I had escaped one kind of invisibility only to find a new, more profound version. I was the only person there without a convoy. I dragged my own bag up 4 flights of stairs. I made my own bed. I sat in the silent, empty room and listened to the sounds of happy, tearful goodbyes echoing in the hall. And then I found the lab. The systems optimization lab was not in one of the pretty brick buildings. It was in the basement of the engineering complex, a place of concrete and exposed pipes. It smelled of hot plastic, ozone, and industrial-strength coffee. And it was the most beautiful place I had ever been. It was not a room. It was a nervous system. Racks of servers hummed, their blue and red lights blinking in complex rhythms. Spools of multicolored wires snaked across tables, and the constant, high-pitched, melodic whine of dozens of cooling fans. It was the sound of thought. It was the sound of problems being solved. This was a language I understood. It was not based on unspoken rules or shifting loyalties. It was about inputs and outputs. It was about efficiency. It was about finding the bottleneck, identifying the fault, and making the system work. My garage radio had been a primer. This was the library. I found a workstation in the corner. I plugged in my radio, and I did not leave. I stopped measuring time in days. I measured it in project cycles. I lived in that lab. I slept on a cot I found in a storage closet, curled up under the blinking lights of the server racks. I lived on vending machine coffee and the stale, leftover pizza from study groups I was too focused to join. I was running on pure code. My body became just another inefficient system that I had to manage, an inconvenience. And eventually, that system failed. I was 3 days deep into a diagnostic on a logistics algorithm, a program to optimize disaster relief supply chains. The screen was a blur of data. The hum of the fans deepened, becoming a roar in my ears. I remember thinking, the voltage is dropping. There's a fault in the power supply. Then the floor came up to meet me. I woke up on a narrow cot in the campus infirmary. The fluorescent light overhead was blinding. "You're Rosa," I managed to say. A girl was watching me. Dark hair, dark eyes, an expression of intense practicality. She was in my systems group. She nodded. "You passed out. I caught your head before it hit the heat sink on the number 3 server. You've been out for 4 hours. Your temperature was 103, exhaustion, dehydration, and a caffeine overdose. Impressive, actually." A doctor came in. He was kind, gray-haired, and looked worried. He held my chart. "You need to rest, young lady. You can't burn the candle at both ends and in the middle. You're running on empty." He sighed, the sigh of a man who had given this speech 1,000 times. Is there anyone we can call? Your family? Your parents? The question hung in the sterile air. Call home. Call where? Call the house where I was an inconvenience? Call the man who saw my future as a regret? Call the people who wouldn't even look me in the eye? I looked at the doctor. I smiled. It felt strange, a muscular action my face had forgotten. No, I said. There's no one. When he left the room, I picked up my phone. I scrolled through the contacts. It was a short list. I found his name. Father. I looked at it for a long time. I pressed edit. I scrolled to the bottom. I pressed delete contact. A small confirmation box popped up. I pressed delete. A small digital pop, and he was gone. My system was optimized. That night, banned from the lab. I was back in my dorm room. I boiled water in a cheap electric kettle. I poured it into a styrofoam cup of instant noodles. The steam rose, feeling good on my face. I sat on the cold floor, in the dark, looking out the window at the quiet campus. I was alone. I was 3,000 miles from Ohio. I had no one to call. I was eating a 79-cent dinner. A strange feeling bubbled up in my chest. It was light. It was warm. I realized I was smiling. I was happier, in that one, sterile, empty moment, than I had ever been in my entire life. The revelation landed with the quiet, solid click of a circuit breaker resetting. I wasn't invisible. I had never been invisible. I was just in the wrong place. I was a precision instrument being used as a paperweight. I was a high-capacity server being used to balance a wobbly table. I finished the noodles, drank the salty broth, and for the first time since I'd left Ohio, I slept for 8 whole hours. Rosa didn't just save my life. She became my first real partner. We were a closed-loop system, 2 components that just fit. She was the strategist, the one who saw the entire board. I was the diagnostician, the one who could see every wire inside every piece. We tore through the Ridgeway curriculum. We didn't just study the systems. We broke them, rebuilt them, and made them faster. By our junior year, we weren't just students. We were consultants. The professors, to their credit, recognized what we were and started routing real-world problems to us. That's how we found HelioRoute Labs. HelioRoute wasn't a company. It was a chaotic, beautiful idea. It was founded by 3 former aid workers who had gotten tired of watching life-saving supplies rot on docks, locked in bureaucratic gridlock. Their mission was simple: build a logistics platform that could outthink the chaos of a disaster. Their office was, literally, a 2-car garage in Somerville, 3 blocks from a sausage factory. The rent was cheap, and the air perpetually smelled of burnt coffee, old wiring, and smoked paprika. This was not a sleek, venture capital-funded tech hub. It was 4 folding tables, a network of bright orange extension cords, and a server rack in the bathroom that you had to unplug to use the sink. The walls were covered in whiteboards, which were themselves covered in a frantic, overlapping scrawl of algorithms, shipping routes, and desperate pleas like, "Who drank the last coffee?" The enthusiasm was a physical force. It was a 24-hour-a-day, caffeine-fueled, sleep-when-you're-dead passion. They weren't building an app to sell ads. They were building a system to move medicine. And the system was a total, catastrophic failure. It was beautiful in theory, but in practice, it was a mess. It was slow. It crashed if you looked at it wrong. The forecasting module, which was supposed to predict supply needs before they became critical, was basically a random number generator. It can't handle the variables. Ben, the lead founder, told Rosa and me, his hands buried in his hair. He looked like he hadn't slept since the company was founded. A typhoon hits, a border closes, a bridge washes out, our model just gives up. It's useless. Rosa and I looked at each other. This wasn't a theoretical problem from a textbook. This was a complex, multivariable system under critical stress. It was, in other words, exactly what we were built for. We started as interns, paid in stale bagels and unlimited, terrible coffee. Within a week, we were running diagnostics. Within 2 weeks, I had found the core of the problem. The code wasn't just inefficient, it was scared. It was built to find the perfect solution. And when faced with the imperfect, chaotic data of a real-world disaster, it froze. "It's trying to win," I told Rosa, tapping the screen. "It needs to learn how to lose correctly. It needs to find the best available route, not the perfect one." The work was brutal. We were on a deadline, a small hospital network in rural Central America, one that was constantly hit by mudslides, had agreed to be our first beta tester. They were giving us one chance. We had 1 month. I moved into the garage. I literally moved in. I took my cot from the Ridgeway lab and set it up behind the rattling server rack, and I brought my radio. That old wooden box, my first friend, sat on my workstation. Its warm, glowing dial, a small point of calm in the chaos. And through the long nights, as I dove into millions of lines of failing code, it played its scratchy, static-laced jazz. It was the soundtrack to my deepest concentration. The night before the system was scheduled to go live, it all fell apart. A minor code patch from another intern had created a cascading failure. The whole forecasting module was corrupted. Ben was pale. Rosa was frantically mapping contingencies on a whiteboard. The mood in the garage was funereal. "It's over," Ben said, his voice flat. "We have to pull the plug. We can't risk it." The team started packing up. Their shoulders slumped. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain outside. I stayed in my chair. The screen in front of me was a wall of red error messages. "London?" Rosa said, her voice soft. "Go," I said, not looking away from the screen. "Go get some sleep, all of you." Ben looked at me. "London, it's a 24-hour rewrite, minimum. We go live in 8 hours. It's impossible." I finally turned. I looked at this man, so full of passion, so utterly defeated. "It's not impossible," I said. "It's just inefficient. The framework is wrong." I turned back to the screen. The scratchy jazz of the radio seemed to get louder, the saxophone finding a clear, mournful note. "Go. I work better when the system is quiet." They left. The garage door closed. It was just me, the server rack, the error messages, and the radio. I didn't try to fix their code. I started a new file. I took a deep breath and began to write. I wasn't just patching their module. I was replacing its heart. I wasn't trying to make it perfect. I was building it to be resilient. I coded for floods. I coded for closed roads. I coded for the assumption that everything, at some point, would fail. And I built pathways around those failures. My fingers flew. The world dissolved. There was no garage, no rain, no exhaustion. There was only the problem and the clean, beautiful logic of the solution. The saxophone on the radio seemed to be playing just for me, a steady, complex rhythm. The sun was coming up. My eyes burned. My hands were cramped into claws. But on the screen, a new module was compiling. No red text, just a clean green, build successful message. I didn't even have time to test it. The system went live at 8 a.m. The first data packets from the hospital network came in at 8:01. We all stood in the garage, watching the main monitor. The first request came in. A rural clinic, cut off by a washed-out road, needed an emergency shipment of anti-venom. The old system would have frozen, endlessly searching for a non-existent road. My module fired. I watched it work. It registered the road closure. It rerouted the request to a different distribution hub. It calculated the new delivery time. It flagged a secondary route in case the first failed. It sent the confirmation. On the screen, a single line of text appeared. Shipment en route, Est. Arrival, 4:15 p.m. No one spoke. We just watched the clock. The entire day was a blur of agonizing, caffeinated silence. At 4:16 p.m., an email pinged Ben's computer. He opened it. It was from the hospital administrator. He read it aloud, his voice cracking. The shipment arrived. I don't know who you people are or how you did it. You just saved 3 lives. You saved real people. God bless you." My legs gave out. I sat down hard on the concrete floor. Rosa was the first one to me, her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. Ben was just staring at the screen, tears streaming down his face. My hands were shaking. I looked at my own hands, so steady when I was soldering wires, so precise when I was typing code. They were trembling, not from cold or exhaustion, but from the sudden, impossible weight of that email. You saved real people. It was not a trophy. It was not a grade. It was not a "that's cute" from my father. It was a life. 3 of them. My code, the silent language I had built for myself in a garage, had reached across the world and done something. A week later, a small local paper ran a story. It was buried on page 6. Small Somerville startup saves lives in Central America. They used a grainy photo of us, standing in the garage, looking exhausted and stunned. For the first time in my life, I felt useful. It was a feeling so profound, so clean. It eclipsed everything else. It was better than pride. It was better than victory. It was the simple, mechanical satisfaction of a system performing its function. I was a component that worked. No one from Dayton called. My mother didn't send a text. My father didn't see the article. And as I stood there, holding that newspaper, a strange, liberating thought hit me. It didn't matter. It didn't matter anymore. Their validation was not a required input for my system. I was running on my own power. HelioRoot exploded. That one successful test opened the floodgates. We got investors. We moved out of the garage and into a real office with windows and a sink that wasn't in the bathroom. I didn't stay an intern. I became a partner. Ben and Rosa were the face of the company. I was the engine. I was promoted to head of systems. I learned a new language, the language of the boardroom. I learned to translate my algorithms into quarterly projections. I learned to explain system architecture in terms of market value. I learned to wear a blazer. But I never, ever forgot what it felt like to sit at the kids' table. I never forgot the feeling of being an inefficient part, of being told I was just taking up space. That memory became my sharpest diagnostic tool. It kept me focused. It made me ruthless. Not in my ambition, but in my demand for efficiency, for systems that didn't leave people behind. And 2 years after that first email, my name was on another document. It wasn't a school report. It wasn't a paycheck. It was a United States patent. My name, London Nguyen, was printed in stark black ink at the top, and underneath it, the title of the thing I had built in that garage, the algorithm that learned to lose, the Seabridge algorithm, a predictive, fault-tolerant logistics model. I had built a shelf, and I had put my own name on it. The Seabridge algorithm didn't just stabilize HelioRoot, it rocketed us into a new atmosphere. The quiet, garage-built engine I had coded through a sleepless night became the industry standard for fault-tolerant logistics. It turned me, London Nguyen, from a basement-dwelling systems analyst into a name, an asset, and that led to the strangest, most dislocating moment of my life. The email from Forbes arrived on a Monday morning. I assumed it was spam. 30 under 30, logistics and health. Rosa, now our chief operating officer, saw it over my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard a human make. "London," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "That's real. That's the real thing." It was 2 months later. I was in a ballroom in Manhattan, wearing a dress that cost more than my first year's worth of instant noodles and a pair of heels that felt like a critical design flaw. The room was a shimmering, glittering system of noise, perfume, champagne, and blindingly successful people. I felt like a ghost variable, an error in the data set. They called my name. I walked across a stage that felt a mile long. The light hot on my face, I shook hands, accepted a heavy, angular glass trophy, and stood at a podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, all of them focused, successful, and seemingly built for this kind of light. I said my thank yous. I thanked Ben. I thanked the founders who had a crazy idea in a garage. I thanked Rosa, who was at our table, openly weeping. I kept it to 30 seconds. Efficient. Precise. The real trouble started at the reception. It was a feeding frenzy of networking, a complex social algorithm I couldn't crack. I was standing near the bar, nursing a club soda, when a reporter, impossibly energetic and holding a microphone, cornered me. "London Nguyen. Incredible," she said, her voice rapid fire. "The Seabridge algorithm is literally changing how we move medicine. It's genius. You must have an incredible support system. What did your family say? How did they react when you told them you'd made the 30 under 30 list?" The question was a standard, expected input, a softball, a simple query meant to elicit a human interest story. And the system crashed. The noise of the ballroom, the clinking glasses, the laughter, the endless, confident chatter seemed to fall away. I was standing there, holding my trophy in one hand, my soda in the other, and I was, for one horrifying second, back at the kids' table. I was back in the hallway, holding a blue ribbon. I thought of my father, Gerald, his face set in that mask of dismissive disappointment. "You'll regret it." I thought of my mother, Patrice, her eyes perpetually fixed on the floor, afraid to make a sound. I thought of Cole and his easy, dismissive laughter. What did they say? They had said nothing. I felt the muscles in my face pull into a smile. It was a reflexive, protective action. I gave her a quote. "They're very traditional," I said, my voice light and smooth. "Back in Ohio, they're much more interested in football than they are in logistics technology." The reporter laughed, a bright, appreciative laugh. "Oh, that's classic. The humble Midwestern roots. I love it." A few people nearby, listening in, chuckled. It was a good line. It was relatable. It made sense. I was standing at the absolute pinnacle of my professional life, holding a symbol of my success, and I had just turned the deepest, most foundational wound of my life into a witty, palatable punchline. And they were laughing. Just like the table had laughed at Thanksgiving. A cold so profound it felt like a physical shock shot up my spine. It was the cold of the garage, the cold of the porch, the cold of the Dayton airport at 4 a.m. I was one of them. I was using a joke to cover a void. I must have gone pale. "Excuse me," I managed to say, setting my glass down. "Thank you." I walked. I didn't run, but I walked with purpose. I pushed through the velvet ropes, past the check-in desk, and found a service corridor. It was empty. It smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and bleach. The light was a sickly, flickering fluorescent. It was perfect. I leaned against the cool, cinder block wall, the rough paint a welcome, real sensation against my skin. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, blinding me. Notifications flooded in. 57 new LinkedIn connection requests, a dozen emails, a text from Rosa filled with champagne and party emojis. I scrolled. I went to my personal text messages. I went to my private email, the one they had. The list had been public for 24 hours. The press releases had been out for 2 days. I had, in a moment of weakness I now regretted, forwarded the official announcement to my mother's email address. Nothing. Not a text, not a missed call, not an email, not one word. The silence was no longer a void. It was an active, weaponized thing. It was a decision. My success was not something to be acknowledged. It was something to be ignored, to be starved of oxygen, to be rendered meaningless. My victory was an annoyance. My name, on a list with the word 30, was not as important as Cole's name on a local sports roster. I stood in that service corridor and did not cry. Crying was an inefficient output. It wasted energy and produced no solutions. I simply logged the data. The connection to Dayton was not faulty. It was severed. The circuit was dead. I took a deep breath, the smell of bleach grounding me. I pushed off the wall. I walked back into the ballroom, found Rosa, took one of the champagne flutes from her hand, and drank it in one long, burning swallow. My work became my sanctuary. The Seabridge algorithm was good, but it needed more data. It needed to be tested against the most chaotic systems on Earth. That's what brought me to Kodiak, Alaska. 3 months after the award ceremony, I was on a work trip to meet with the North Pacific Fishing Fleet. We wanted to integrate our logistics platform with their maritime data, to optimize shipping lanes around the ice flows and the sudden, violent storms that defined their lives. Kodiak was the opposite of New York. It was not a place of polish. It was a place of function. The air didn't smell of perfume. It smelled of salt, diesel, and fish. The people didn't network. They worked. On my 3rd day, a storm blew in from the Bering Sea. It was a monster. The wind hit 80 miles an hour. The power went out across the island. All meetings were canceled. The port shut down. I was stuck in my hotel room, watching the sea try to devour the sky. I felt that old, familiar restlessness, the vibration of a system with no problem to solve. I couldn't sit still. I pulled on the heavy-duty weather gear the hotel provided, went out the door, and walked straight into the wind. The wind was a physical force. It hit me like a wall, stealing my breath. The rain was horizontal, like tiny frozen needles. This was not the manicured, controlled environment of Ohio. This was raw, elemental, and completely indifferent. It didn't care about my name, my awards, or my feelings. And for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders unclench. I walked for what must have been an hour, my head down, following the curve of the bay. I was just letting the wind scour me clean, and then I saw it. It was tucked into a small cove, half hidden by the fog. It was a skeleton, an old abandoned fish cannery, built on massive pilings, leaning out over the black, churning water. Most of the windows were gaping, jagged holes. The siding was bleached silver, much of it torn away. It was a ruin. I found a gap in the rusted chain-link fence and walked onto the property. I stood on the edge of the rotting pier. The wind howled, a high-pitched, mechanical scream. The cold was so sharp it felt hot, burning my cheeks. I looked out at the bay, at the ice slick on the water, and I felt, for the first time in my life, an absolute and profound sense of peace. The noise in my head, the boardroom chatter, the reporter's question, the screaming silence from Dayton, it all just stopped. It was all gone, ripped away by the wind. I was just a small component in a vast, functional, chaotic system. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't taking up space. I was just a part of the weather. And then, the idea, it struck me, not as a gentle inspiration, but as a clean, logical solution, a lightning bolt of pure systems design. This place, it wasn't a ruin, it was a hub, it was a node in a network, built to receive and to distribute. It was a place of function, currently failing. It was wasting its potential. I saw it, in one perfect flash, a logistics center for people, harbor and hearth, a place to coordinate philanthropic aid for the remote islands, a community kitchen to feed people during these storms, a warm, dry place, a table, a different kind of table. I spent the rest of the day, as the storm raged, tracking down the owner. His name was Elias Torgerson, a retired sailor who lived in a small house up the hill. I knocked on his door, looking like a drowned rat in my borrowed yellow gear. He opened it. He had a beard like a snowdrift and eyes the color of the sea ice. "I want to buy your cannery," I said, shouting to be heard over the wind. He looked me up and down. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "It's condemned, little girl. The sea's taking it back. It ain't for sale to tourists looking for a thrill." "I'm not a tourist," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm a systems engineer. I want to restore it. I want to make it a community logistics hub." His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He was reprocessing the data. "The pier supports are shot. The main access stair is rusted through. Fell into the sea last winter. It's a death trap. Useless." "If I can fix it," I said, the words coming out before I had even thought them. "If I can make it safe, if I can prove I'm not just talk, will you sell it?" He stared at me for a long, hard minute. He was judging my architecture. He was testing my load-bearing capacity. Finally, he nodded, a sharp, curt motion. "You fix that stair. You make it solid. Then we talk. I'll be damned if I'll watch another dreamer get herself killed on my property." This was not a test of money. This was a test of function. The patent bonus from the Seabridge algorithm had given me capital. I went to the marine supply store, the only one, and I bought what I needed: a portable generator, a welding rig, a case of high-tensile bolts, and 2 20-foot lengths of galvanized steel I-beam. I spent that night on the shore. The storm was my cover. I set up the generator. Its mechanical roar swallowed by the wind. I put up floodlights, creating a harsh, artificial island of light in the heaving, screaming darkness. And I worked. This was not the delicate soldering of my childhood radio. This was raw. This was heat and steel and force. I cut away the rotted, corroded metal, the grinder sending showers of orange sparks into the black rain. I measured. I measured again. I set the new I-beams. And I welded. The light of the arc was a tiny, furious sun, blinding in the night. My hands, which had been so steady on a keyboard, were steady now, laying a perfect, structural bead of molten metal. I was not just fixing a staircase. I was building my own foundation. I was anchoring myself. I was taking the hot, abstract core of my knowledge and making it physically, undeniably real. When the gray, watery dawn finally broke, I tightened the last bolt. I was soaked. I was freezing. I was covered in grease and soot, and the staircase was solid. Torgerson's truck rumbled up the gravel path. He got out, holding a thermos. He didn't say a word. He walked to the staircase. He stepped onto the landing, and he jumped. He put his full, 200-pound weight onto my welds. It didn't move. It didn't groan. It didn't shift. He jumped again, solid. He looked at the new beams. He looked at the clean, strong welds. He looked at me, this small, exhausted woman who looked more like a mechanic than a tech CEO. He nodded, just once. "You ain't just talk," he said. He unscrewed the cap of his thermos and poured a stream of hot black coffee into it, handing it to me. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I drank the coffee. "I'm calling it Harbor and Hearth," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's going to be a long table, an equal table, where everyone has a seat." "Good name," he grunted. I bought the cannery that afternoon with my patent money. When I got back on the plane to Boston, the deed was in my bag. I checked my phone. Still nothing from Dayton. I didn't care. I turned the phone off. I was too busy designing a new system. I didn't just buy a building. I had bought a new operating system. And a system is only as good as its components. Harbor and Hearth couldn't be a solo project. It was too big. And the core idea was the opposite of solitude. The first person to join the system, officially, was Ilya. He had been Torgerson's welding apprentice years ago and had watched me fix the staircase from his own boat, nursing a thermos of what I later learned was 90% whiskey. He was a man of few words and flawless technique. He showed up the day after I signed the papers. He didn't ask for a job. He just pointed a scarred finger at a failing support piling. "That one goes next," he'd grunted. "You'll need a cofferdam. I've got one." He became my head of structural integrity, which was his fancy title for the man who keeps us from falling into the sea. Next was May. She was a carpenter who specialized in salvaging wood from shipwrecks. She saw the acres of old-growth timber inside the cannery, not as rot, but as a resource. "This is good wood," she said, her hands running over a blackened beam. "It's got a history. It just needs to be repurposed." She saw me not as a CEO, but as a fellow builder. And then came Nora. Nora was a former line cook from a fishing trawler, which meant she could cook a 5-star meal for 20 people in the middle of a typhoon. Using only a hot plate and a single-minded fury, she believed food was the most important form of logistics. "People are just systems," she told me, sharpening a knife. "They need fuel, good fuel. You get 'em the fuel, they'll work." Ilya, May, Nora. They weren't employees. They were the first members of the table. And May built the table. It was the first and only thing I commissioned. I need a table, I told her. 10 seats? No, not a rectangle, not an oval. I want it round, or as close to round as you can get with old wood. A round table for 10, she said, sketching on a piece of plywood. Why 10? It feels like a good number, enough for a team, small enough for a family. And one rule, May, all 10 chairs must be identical. No armrests, no bigger chairs, every seat is the same. She smiled. I like that. No king, no queen, just a parliament. She built it from a massive, 900-year-old piece of yellow cedar she had pulled from a shipwreck. It was enormous, a pale, scarred, beautiful disc of wood. It was so heavy we had to assemble it in the main hall. When it was done, we placed 10 simple, sturdy chairs around it. Elia, Nora, May, and I stood there, just looking at it. Now what? Elia asked. Now the rules, I said. I went to the workshop and found a small whiteboard. I brought it back and set it on an easel next to the table. I wrote 3 things on it. The table rules. 1. We sit 10. No one sits at the head, because there is no head. 2. We speak one at a time. No one is interrupted. We listen with the intent to understand, not just to reply. 3. If you cut someone off twice, you get up and you reset the coffee pot for the group. No exceptions. Nora laughed out loud, a sharp barking sound. Rule 3 is genius. It's a tax on assholes. I love it. It's a system, I said. It optimizes for respect. Harbor and hearth began to take shape. The cavernous, echoing main floor, which used to be for processing fish, became our center. We insulated the walls. Elia and his team replaced every rusted-out support, their welding arcs lighting up the dark corners. May's crew used the reclaimed wood to build workstations, shelving, and a massive, professional-grade community kitchen for Nora. We became a functioning nonprofit, a public benefit corporation. Our mission? To be a logistical and material support hub for the island and the surrounding remote communities, a place for warmth, a place for food, a place for systems that worked for people. And in the corner of the main hall, on a shelf May built specially for it, I placed my old radio. I plugged it into a brand new, grounded, and perfectly rated outlet. I turned the knob. Through the wind and the salt air, 3,000 miles from that Dayton garage, a scratchy, familiar saxophone note filled the space. Nora looked up from her stove. Elia stopped his grinder. What's that? Nora asked. It's the heartbeat, I said, and the jazz played on, a quiet, steady rhythm underneath the sound of our hammers and our welding. We worked for 2 months, a frantic, focused race against the calendar. Winter in Kodiak is not a season. It's a siege. We were stocking shelves, testing our communication arrays, and running diagnostics on our new generators when the first siege weapon was fired. The blizzard hit on a Friday. It was not a normal storm. This was a statement. The wind didn't just howl. It screamed, a solid, 100-mile-an-hour wall of sound. The snow was so thick it was like the world had been erased, replaced with a churning, violent white. For 48 hours, the island was dark, and then the calls started. Our new satellite phone, the one system I'd insisted on, rang. It was a clinic on Afognak, a small, remote island to the north. They were cut off. The storm had destroyed their primary generator, and their backup was failing. They had 3 critical patients on ventilators and a dwindling supply of diesel. And to make it worse, their pharmacy had been compromised by a roof leak. They were out of antibiotics, and one of their patients was developing a critical infection. They were a system in catastrophic failure. I stood in our main hall. The lights were on. The heat was running. Nora had a massive pot of stew on the stove. Elia and May were playing chess at the great round table. I walked over to the whiteboard and wrote, "A Fognac clinic, 3 critical, generator failing, no antibiotics." The team gathered. There was no panic. This was not an if, It was a how. The diesel is easy, Ilya said, pointing. We have 3 55-gallon drums of marine grade. The problem is the transport. The sea's a mess. The sea is bad, May agreed, pulling up a weather chart on her tablet. But the wind is from the west. It's created a lee, a small one, between the islands. If we go now, we can make it before the tide turns. May wasn't just a carpenter. She was one of the best pilots on the island. I'll pack the antibiotics and the generator parts, I said. No, Nora said, pulling off her apron. You're the pilot. You run the system from here. I'll pack the meds. I know the inventory. Ilya, you're the muscle. You load the diesel. We were a machine. Within 20 minutes, May and Ilya were in our heavy-bottomed, ice-reinforced pilot boat, loaded with fuel, medicine, and a new generator core. I was at the radio desk, my old radio on one side, the high-frequency maritime radio on the other. I was their logistical support. For 5 hours, I sat there, tracing their path on a digital map, listening to the static. The jazz from my old radio was a counterpoint to the sharp, anxious crackle of the Marine band. At 3 a.m, my speaker popped. Harbor Base, this is Hearth. We are at the dock. Supplies are moving. May's voice was tired but clear. I exhaled. I had not realized I was holding my breath for 5 hours. They returned at dawn. Their faces rhymed with frozen salt. Nora had hot coffee and food waiting. They sat at the round table. They didn't speak. They just ate. The call from the clinic came 2 days later. The storm had broken. We're stable, the nurse said, her voice thick with exhaustion. The new generator is running. The infection is receding. The patients are stable. Harbor and Hearth. You did it. You really did it. A local reporter, the one who ran the Kodiak Bay Journal, heard the story on the radio chatter. She came by the next week. She interviewed May and Ilya. She talked to Nora. She took a picture of the table. Her headline was simple: Harbor and Hearth, the warmest table in the cold water. The story was small. It wasn't Forbes. It wasn't 30 under 30, but it was real. The night the paper came out, we held our first official community dinner. We invited the boat crews, the nurses from the local clinic, the linemen who had been working for a week straight to get the power back. The hall was full. It was loud. It was warm. People were eating Nora's food, sitting at May's table, kept safe by Ilya's welds. I looked around at the crowd. Fishermen, engineers, kids, elders, all of them talking, all of them laughing. No one was at the head of the table. Someone snapped a photo. It wasn't posed. It was just a moment. A dozen people, faces glowing in the warm light, sharing a meal. The next day, someone posted it on social media. At the equal table at Harbor and Hearth. The hashtag started to move, slowly, organically, not a viral explosion, but a quiet, steady signal. Equal table. I felt a click. The system was online. That night, after everyone had left, I went to the workshop. I found a small, smooth piece of driftwood that May had saved. I took out my wood-burning kit, a tool I'd bought for myself, a tool of precision and patience. I burned a single sentence into the wood. I drilled 2 small holes. I hung it on the heavy front door, right at eye level, where no one could miss it. It was the new, permanent, and only rule of the house. No one takes up space here. I stood in the quiet hall, just me and the radio. The jazz was playing. I had built my system. I had my team. I had my purpose. But there was one last connection I needed to make. One last, frayed wire from the old network that I had to test. I sat at the round table, at one of the 10 equal chairs, and I pulled out a piece of stationery. I wrote a letter. Dear Grandma Lillian. She was my father's mother, but she was not like him. She was a woman of sharp edges and a quiet, unshakable sense of justice. She was the only one who had ever told my father to his face that he was wrong about me. The only one who had ever tried to pull me up to the main table. I told her about Kodiak. I told her about the storm. I told her about the table. I enclosed a copy of the Kodiak Bay Journal article. I didn't ask for her approval. I didn't ask for anything. I just sent her an invitation. We have 10 seats. The first one is for you. The coffee is always on. We are building something good here. I mailed it. I expected nothing. A response from that part of the world felt, at this point, statistically unlikely. A week later, a small, handwritten postcard arrived. It was a picture of a bright orange marmalade cat. I turned it over. The handwriting was spidery, but the ink was a strong, determined blue. London. Heard you built a table. Good. The ones back here are all wobbly. I'll be on the ferry next Tuesday. I'm bringing my marmalade. You save a spot for a smile. Love, Lillian. I stuck the postcard to the refrigerator in Nora's kitchen, right next to the new order forms. Harbor and Hearth was no longer just my project. It was my heartbeat. It was my home. And now, it was becoming the heartbeat of this small, cold, and wonderfully functional town. The system worked. It worked so well that for 6 months, I forgot the old one even existed. Grandma Lillian arrived on the Tuesday ferry, just as she'd promised. She was a small, tough woman, her hair a shock of white, her eyes the same sharp, assessing blue as her son's, but without the cold. She stepped onto the dock in Kodiak, holding a small suitcase in one hand and a carrier in the other. A huge, grumpy-looking orange cat glared at me from inside. "This is Marmalade," she announced, her voice as crisp as the salt air. "He and I are here for the smiles. You'd better have good coffee. London, I didn't raise my son to raise a daughter who serves bad coffee." She fit into Harbor and Hearth like a missing component. She didn't help. She just found a functional role. She claimed a chair at the round table and became the unofficial, and terrifyingly efficient, administrator of Nora's kitchen. She managed inventory, she managed the volunteers, and she managed to make every single person who walked in the door feel like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. She was the operating system for our warmth. Life settled into a new rhythm. It was a rhythm of function, not dysfunction, of purpose, not obligation. My days were spent running the logistics of Harbor and Hearth, optimizing supply routes to the outer islands, and managing the code of the Seabridge algorithm, which was still the engine of my Boston company. I was 2 people, seamlessly integrated, the head of systems, and the woman with the welding gloves. Then, in early November, as the first real snows were just beginning to dust the mountains, the old frequency crackled to life. It was an email, not a text, not a call, an email, which was the most formal, arm's length, and emotionally sterile medium my mother could have chosen. It was from her, from Patrice. The subject line was, simply, Thanksgiving. The body was even shorter. "Thanksgiving is at 6 o'clock. We expect you to be here. Come home." I read it 4 times. I was sitting at the round table, the morning light streaming in, the smell of Nora's fresh bread, and Lillian's good coffee in the air. Elia and May were arguing amiably about the load-bearing capacity of a new boat design. "We expect you," not "we'd love to see you," not "we miss you." It was a summons. It was an input command from an obsolete system. I felt a cold, familiar knot in my stomach, the old automatic response. Minimize, comply, survive. "Bad data?" Lillian asked. She was sitting across from me, sipping her coffee, watching me. She missed nothing. I slid my laptop around so she could read the email. She read it. She sighed. A long, slow sound of profound irritation. "Well, Robert," she muttered. "You never did learn." She looked up at me. "Patrice is a coward, but she's a precise coward. This isn't an invitation. London, it's a demand for surrender. She's telling you to come back and get back in your box." "I'm not going," I said, my voice too quick. "I'm not. We have our own dinner here. We're feeding the whole dock. I'm needed here." Lillian smiled, a small, sad smile. "Of course you are, but you and I both know this isn't about the dinner." I closed the laptop. I didn't reply to the email. The request was an error. I flagged it and moved on. I had real work to do. The problem was, the old system had a new input. 2 days later, a reporter from a Seattle newspaper flew in. She wasn't from the business desk. She was a feature writer. She had seen the Equal Table hashtag. She had heard the story from the Kodiak Bay Journal. She wanted to know what it was all about. I was hesitant. I didn't want the Forbes treatment again, but Lillian pushed me. "This isn't about your algorithm, London," she said. "This is about your table. People are hungry for that. Let her see the table." So I did. The reporter, a smart, quiet woman named Anna, didn't just interview me. She spent 3 days at Harbor and Hearth. She ate Nora's stew. She helped Lillian unload a shipment of potatoes. She went on a supply run with May. She watched Elia weld a new brace for the pier. She sat at the round table with us for dinner. She listened to our rules. She watched as Elia, a man of maybe 50 words a day, was given 10 uninterrupted minutes to describe, in loving detail, a problem he was having with a diesel engine. No one cut him off. Everyone listened. Her story ran on the front page of the Seattle paper's Sunday edition. It was a beautiful, compassionate piece. It wasn't about London Nguyen tech genius. It was about the equal table. Anna had, with devastating precision, quoted me. She had asked me why I had built it, and I had, in a moment of trust, given her the truth. I grew up in a house with a very specific kind of table. I had told her, where one person sat at the head, and everyone else's job was to be quiet. I was taught that my only function was to be unseen, that I was just taking up space. I built this place to be the opposite of that. I built a table where there is no head. I built a place where the only rule is that no one, ever, just takes up space. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has a seat. The story was picked up by the wire services. It went from a Seattle feature to a national human interest story in less than 24 hours. It was a good story. It was the anti-corporate, feel-good, pre-holiday story. Everyone wanted to read. Tech CEO trades Silicon Valley gloss for Alaskan grit, builds a table for the forgotten. It was, without my intending it, a guided missile, and it was aimed directly at the heart of Dayton, Ohio. The first indication I had was the flood of emails to the Harbor and Hearth info address. Then, the social media tags. My distant cousins, my aunts, people I hadn't seen since I was at the kids' table. They were all sharing the article on Facebook. "This is Gerald and Patrice's daughter. Look at this. Wow, Patrice, you must be so proud. She's a saint." They were tagging them. They were tagging Cole. They were holding up my story, my words, my truth, and shining it like a spotlight on the front porch of the house I had escaped. I was in my small office, the one May had built me overlooking the bay, when the call came, my cell phone, which so rarely rang with a number not from Boston or Kodiak, lit up. Unknown number. Dayton, oh. My heart didn't leap. It didn't pound. It just went cold. It felt heavy in my chest, a dead component. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. "This is London." Silence, just the sound of a television in the background, a football game. Then, his voice, the voice that had defined my world, the voice of the head of the table. "Gerald, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" It was not a question. It was a condemnation. The voice was low, cold, and vibrating with a fury I knew in my bones. I leaned back in my chair. I looked out the window at the bay. The water was calm, gray, and free. "Hello, Father," I said. My voice was steady. It was a new component, one he had never heard. "Don't you hello father me," he snarled. "I have had your Aunt Mary on the phone for 20 minutes. Your mother is upstairs, crying. The whole neighborhood is reading this garbage you've been spouting. Taking up space? Is that what you're telling the world? That we abused you?" I told the truth, I said, still calm, still quiet. I was asked why I built my table, so I told them. "Your table," he scoffed. The word dripped with contempt. "You think you're so important, don't you? With your little project, you're making us a laughingstock. London, you are airing our private family business and making us look like monsters. all for a little bit of attention. It wasn't about you, I said. It wasn't about attention. It was a story about harbor and hearth. I'm sorry it's upsetting you. You're sorry? He roared, and I heard the sound of a fist hit a table. You embarrass your parents. You humiliate your brother. You drag our name through the mud in front of the entire country. And you're sorry? You have no idea what you've done. You are to get on a plane. You are to come home for Thanksgiving. And you are to put a stop to this. You are to tell them you misspoke. You will fix this. And there it was. The summons. The demand. The assumption that my function was, and always would be, to manage his comfort. I was about to answer. I was about to say, no. I was about to hang up the phone and sever the connection for good. But then, a new voice entered the system. My office door had opened. Lillian was standing there. She had heard the shouting, even from across the hall. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. She pointed to the speakerphone button. I pressed it. My father's heavy, angry breathing filled my small, quiet office. Gerald, Lillian said. Her voice was not loud. It was a steel beam. The breathing on the other end of the line stopped. The silence was absolute. Even the football game seemed to go quiet. Ma, he said. His voice was a fraction of what it had been. He was no longer the head of the table. He was just a son, caught in the act. I am sitting here in my granddaughter's office, Lillian said, her voice dangerously calm. In her building, the one she bought with her own money, the one she rebuilt with her own hands, and I am listening to you yell at her for being successful. Ma, you don't understand, Gerald stammered, his fury instantly replaced by a panicked, defensive whine. She's telling lies. She's making things up. She's embarrassing the family. She is not, Lillian snapped, and this time her voice cracked like a whip. I am reading the article. I have read it 10 times. I don't see one single lie in it. Did you or did you not keep this girl at a card table until she was 17 years old? Did you or did you not tell her that her science award was cute and to go cheer for her brother? I was there. Robert, I saw it. I was teaching her. It was coal-needed. He was sputtering, the logic of his system collapsing under a direct assault. You taught her nothing, Lillian said, her voice dropping to a cold, quiet register that was more terrifying than any yell. She taught herself. You had a table, Robert, and you broke it. You took a good, solid family table and you cracked it right down the middle with your own pride. This child didn't break your table. She went out and she built a new one, a better one that actually works. Silence. A long, gaping, electrical void. He had no input for this. He had no counter-argument. For the first time in his life, his system had been outmaneuvered, his authority rendered irrelevant. He had been beaten, not by me, but by his own mother. I heard a click. He had hung up. Lillian and I stood in the quiet office. The only sound was the faint, scratchy jazz from the radio in the main hall. She looked at me, her face grim. Well, she said, that's that. No, I said. The word came out of me, solid and sure. No, it's not. I sat down at my computer. I opened a web browser. What are you doing? She asked. Booking a flight, I said. I typed in the airport code for Dayton. I'm going to Thanksgiving. Lillian looked at me, her head cocked. London, you don't have to. You have nothing to prove to that old fool. I know, I said. I found a flight. It left the next day. I'm not going to prove anything. I'm not going to apologize, and I'm not going to ask for a seat. I looked up at her, and I felt the last piece of the system click into place. I'm going to change the rules of his table. That night, I packed a small duffel bag. I packed a change of clothes. I packed my laptop, and then I went to the main hall. It was late. Everyone was gone. It was just me and the music. I walked to the shelf. I unplugged my old radio. My first friend, the one I had fixed in the garage. I coiled the cord. I carefully, gently, placed it in my bag. Before I left for the airport, I made one last entry in my journal. I wrote it on a fresh page. Do not go to be accepted. Do not go to be forgiven. Go to end the silence. Go to perform the final diagnostic. The system is broken. Go and show them how to fix it. The taxi pulled up to the curb, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the house. It wasn't that it had changed, it was that it had shrunk. The lawn, which had once felt like an impassive green sea, was now just a small, neat rectangle of grass. The house itself, which had lived in my memory as an imposing brick structure, was just a 2-story box, smaller than the equipment shed at Harbor and Hearth. It was a physical, jarring representation of how my own perspective had been re-engineered. The only thing that felt familiar was the flickering porch light, a faulty connection that no one had ever bothered to properly fix. I paid the driver, the cab's engine noise vanishing into the quiet. Manicured street. I stood on the sidewalk, my duffel bag in one hand. Inside it, wrapped in a sweater, was my radio. I had brought my own heartbeat. I walked up the concrete path. Each step was a data point. The crack I used to trace was still there. The welcome mat was the same. I rang the bell. The door was opened by Patrice, my mother. She looked startled, as if she hadn't truly believed I would come. She was thinner than I remembered, or maybe just more faded. Her smile was a blueprint of a real expression, a tight, anxious pulling of the skin around her mouth. London, you're here? You're here? Hello, Mother, I said. I stepped inside. The house smelled the same. It was a combination of my father's expensive aftershave, lemon-scented wood polish, and the thick, savory smell of a turkey that had been roasting for 8 hours. It was the smell of enforced, brittle perfection. I walked past the hallway, the altar. The trophies were all still there, polished and gleaming, catching the light. Cole's entire life, rendered in cheap metal and plastic. My one laminated menu on the fridge was gone. The dining room was exactly as my memory, and my nightmares, had rendered it. The long, glossy table was set for 8. At the head, my father's chair. At the foot, my mother's. At his right hand, Cole's. And then, shoved into the corner, jammed between the wall and the heavy, dark china cabinet, was the 9th, unofficial, temporary seat, the overflow, the kids' table, promoted but not welcomed. My seat. They were all there. Cole, softer now, heavier in the jaw. The high school quarterback's glory fading into a salesman's expensive suit. He was already at the table, a beer in his hand. His wife, Ashley, a woman with the same nervous, placating smile as my mother, and their 2 children, a boy of about 8 and a girl of 6, the new generation, being programmed into the system. And at the head of the table, not yet seated, but standing, a glass of red wine in his hand, was Gerald. My father. He didn't look at me with anger, not yet. He looked at me with a kind of appraising, dismissive curiosity, as if I were a new appliance he hadn't approved. London, he said, his voice a low rumble of authority. You made it. Your mother was worried. Take your seat. We're about to carve. He said it. Take your seat. He pointed, not with his finger, but with his chin, toward the corner, toward the chair by the cabinet. I didn't argue. I didn't say a word. This was not the time. This was the observation phase. I was a diagnostician. I was here to observe the system in its natural, failing state. I walked to the chair. I had to turn sideways to squeeze between the cabinet and the table. I sat. My view was of the dining room wallpaper, a repeating pattern of dull gold flowers. The performance began. Gerald sat down, and the entire room's energy field tilted toward him. He was the sun. They were the planets, held in orbit by the sheer gravity of his ego. He began to carve the turkey, a long, surgical, and performative process. Patrice was a vapor. She drifted between the kitchen and the dining room, her movements silent, her only function to anticipate and serve. More wine, Gerald? Is the gravy hot enough? She was a system designed for one purpose, to minimize his friction. Cole was the echo. He was boasting. He had just closed a big sale. He was looking at a new house, a bigger one. He used the word we, but he meant I. His wife, Ashley, nodded at every cue, her smile bright and vacant. That's wonderful, honey. Of course you did. The new generation, the children, were quiet. They had been trained, as I had been trained, to be seen and not heard. They ate their food, their eyes wide, their small silver forks moving with careful, practiced silence. I sat, I ate, I listened, I said nothing. My silence was a vacuum. It was a void in their system, and it was beginning to make them nervous. Cole would direct a question at me. So, Alaska, huh? Must be cold. It is, I said. Heard you run some kind of charity thing in a barn? It's a logistics hub, I said, in a former cannery. Right, logistics, he laughed, sharing a look with his father. The shared, dismissive humor, the code. She's still the weird one. Don't worry. The system is stable. I watched them. I listened to the sound of the silverware on the china. Clink, scrape, tap. It was the rhythm of my childhood. It was the metronome of my own suppression. Clink, Gerald tells a story. Scrape, Cole laughs. Too loud. Tap, Patrice gets up to fetch something. It was the sound of a broken, looping program. We finished the main course. Patrice cleared the plates. Gerald sat back, his glass full. He was expansive. He was in complete control. The phone call with Lillian, the article, my very presence. He had successfully absorbed them all. He had proven that his system was stronger. He held up his glass. It was time for the speech. This was the part of the performance where he reinforced the hierarchy. A good meal, he said, holding his glass toward the center of the table. A good family. We've had a successful year. Cole is at the top of his game. The family is growing. He nodded at his grandchildren. It's important, in times like these, to remember what makes a family work. He paused. He was looking at the table, but his energy was focused on me. I was the ungreased wheel. I was the component that was failing to comply. It works, he said, his voice dropping, because everyone knows their role. Everyone contributes. He took a sip of wine. He smiled, a thin, cold smile, and he delivered the line. He delivered the input I had been waiting for. Some people, he said, his eyes finding mine across the room, are built to achieve, to make their family proud. He nodded at Cole. And some people, well, some people just take up space. The old laughter. It was not the roar I remembered. It was a nervous, required tittering. Cole chuckled. Ashley smiled into her napkin. Patrice's eyes were fixed on the stain in the tablecloth. The program had executed the error. The system was now vulnerable. I did not sigh. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I carefully, and very quietly, placed my fork and my knife on my plate, side by side, the tines and blade pointing to 10 o'clock. The small porcelain click of the silver was the only sound in the room. The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of compliance. It was the silence of a held breath. You know, I said, my voice calm, level, and just loud enough to fill the space. It's funny you mention that. I reached into my pocket. I took out my phone. What are you doing? Gerald said, his authority already fraying. We don't have phones at the table. I am introducing a new protocol, I said. I looked at Cole, at Ashley, at my mother. I just sent you all a link. I'd like you to read it. A moment of confusion, then, the sound of 3 phones buzzing on the table. A sudden, digital intrusion. My mother fumbled for hers. Ashley, the new daughter-in-law, picked hers up immediately, her face a mask of confusion. Cole just stared at his, annoyed. London, this is not the time, my father boomed. It's exactly the time, I said. Please, read it. Patrice squinted at her screen. Ashley's eyes widened. Cole's son, Leo, who had been silent for 2 hours. slid off his chair and went to look over his mother's shoulder. "What is it, Mommy?" It's from your aunt's website," Ashley whispered, reading. "It's rules." "Read them out loud." "Ashley," I said, my voice still calm. Ashley looked at Gerald, terrified. He was rigid. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "I will," said Leo. The 8-year-old. He grabbed his mother's phone. He was a child. He didn't understand the subtext. He just saw words. "Rule 1, he shouted, his voice high and clear. "We sit 10. No one sits at the head, because there is no head." I heard my mother make a small sound, a tiny gasp. Gerald's face, which had been pale with anger, was now turning a deep, blotchy red. "That is enough, Leo." "No, wait," Leo said, excited. "Rule 2, we speak one at a time. No one is interrupted. We listen to," he squinted, intent, to understand. "And Rule 3, Leo yelled, laughing. "If you cut someone off 2 times, you get up and you reset the coffee pot for the group. No exceptions. Attacks on assholes. What's an asshole, Mommy?" The word hung in the air. A beautiful, perfect, system-crashing bomb. Ashley was mortified. Cole was furious. "Leo, give me the phone." But the boy was just excited. He looked at me, his eyes bright. "That's so cool. Can we play? I want to play that. And I want to sit next to Aunt London. She's from Alaska." The new generation. He had seen a better system, and he had chosen it, instantly. The first crack had appeared, and then the second. My mother, Patrice. She had been frozen, her hands in her lap. She looked at her grandson, Leo, who was now trying to pull a chair over to my corner. She looked at her husband, his face a mask of thunder. She looked at me, sitting in my cramped, designated space. She took a breath. It was a small, shuddering thing, and she spoke. "He's right, Gerald," she whispered. My father turned his glare on her. "What did you say?" Maybe we should," Patrice said, her voice trembling but holding. "Maybe we should change the seating." It was a tectonic shift. It was the sound of a planet breaking orbit. She, the high priestess of his system, had just suggested a new protocol. The explosion was instantaneous. Gerald slammed his hands on the table. The wine glasses jumped. The children flinched. The silver rattled. "Change the seating?" he roared, the sound filling the room, the house, my memory. He was on his feet. The king was on his throne, and the throne was shaking. "This is my house. This is my table. This is my family. There is no new seating. There is my way. And you," he said, his finger stabbing the air, aimed directly at me, "will respect it, or you will get out. You do not come in here with your rules." The room was frozen. This was the failure point. This was the moment the old system would reassert control. The moment I was supposed to cry, to apologize, to shrink. They were all waiting for me to shrink. I did not. I remained seated for one long, diagnostic second. I let his echo fade. I looked at my mother, who was now pale and shaking, her small rebellion already extinguished. I looked at Cole, who was just staring at his father, impassive. Then, I looked up at Gerald. He was breathing heavily, his face purple, his authority absolute in his own mind. My voice, when I spoke, was not a whisper. It was not a shout. It was a simple, flat, structural fact. "I am not asking for a seat at your table, Father," I said. I let the words land. The silence they created was total. "I am not asking for your permission. I am not asking to be included. I was never here to respect this." I gestured at the table. "This system is broken. It's inefficient. And it's cruel." I pushed my chair back. The legs made a loud, violent scrape against the hardwood floor. It was the sound of a connection being permanently severed. I stood up. I was no longer crammed in the corner. I was in the room. I was taller than I had been. I walked to the doorway where I had left my bag. I picked it up. The weight of the radio inside was comforting. It was real. "I'm not here to change your seating," I said, my hand on the doorknob to the hallway. "I already built my own table." I looked at them all. One last time. My father, frozen in his rage. My mother, who was now, finally, weeping silent tears into her hands. Cole, who just looked confused, his system unable to process an outcome that wasn't about him, and the small boy, Leo, who was watching me with a look of absolute, unfiltered awe. I turned. I walked out of the room. I walked down the hallway, past the altar of my brother's achievements. I opened the front door. The porch light flickered, and I stepped out into the cold, clean, quiet Ohio night. No one tried to stop me. No one said my name. The system was, at last, silent. I was at the front door. My hand was on the knob. The metal was cold, and I was seconds away from pulling it, from walking out into the night and closing this circuit for good. My duffel bag, with the radio inside, was a solid, comforting weight in my other hand. Wait. The voice was not my father's. It was not my mother's. It was sharp, clear, and did not belong in this house. I turned. Grandma Lillian was standing in the archway of the living room, a room I had just walked past, a room I hadn't even looked into. She hadn't been at the table. She was dressed, not in holiday finery, but in her crisp, no-nonsense travel clothes. She must have flown in from Kodiak. She must have come here directly. She was holding a pale yellow manila folder. My father, who had been frozen in his throne room rage, saw her. The color drained from his face. The anger was instantly replaced by a different, weaker emotion, fear. "Ma," he said, his voice a strangled, reedy sound. "I thought you were in Alaska. I thought you were with her." "I am Robert," Lillian said, walking forward into the center of the hallway. She moved with a purpose, a small, tough ship navigating a field of ice. "I am with her. I'm always with her." She looked at me, and her eyes were not angry. They were just precise. "Before you go, London, I think there's one last piece of data you need to log for the system." She didn't hand the folder to me. She walked past me, past my father, and she slapped the folder down on the hallway console table, right under Cole's biggest, gaudiest MVP trophy. "I was a bookkeeper for 45 years. Robert," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. The whole house was listening now. My mother, Cole, and Ashley were crowded in the dining room archway, watching. "I know how to run a diagnostic. I know how to find a corrupted file. After your phone call, I decided to run one." She flipped open the folder. "This," she said, pulling out a single sheet of paper, "is a copy of a bank loan from 8 years ago for $30,000. She handed it to me. I took it. My hands were steady. I looked at the paper. Dayton Community Auto and Business. Loan amount, $30,000 and 00 at 100. And at the bottom, on the cosigner line, was my name, London Nguyen. It was my signature, or a very good, very practiced forgery of it. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I simply processed. The world narrowed to the ink on that page. A cold, hard, logical click sounded in my head. I've never seen this document in my life," I said, my voice a dead, flat monotone. "Gerald?" my mother whispered. She had crept forward, her hand at her throat. "What is that? You told me your mother co-signed for Cole's truck." "He needed it!" Gerald suddenly exploded, his fear momentarily eclipsed by his bluster. It was his last remaining defense. The boy needed a reliable vehicle. He was starting a business. It was a family need. It was just paperwork. "So you used her," Lillian said. Her voice was a razor. "You didn't use your own credit, Robert, because you were over-leveraged on this ridiculous house. You didn't use Cole's, because he didn't have any. You used hers. You used the name of your 19-year-old daughter, who was 3,000 miles away, eating noodles from a cup. You used her future as collateral. A memory, a ghost in the system, a piece of corrupted data I had never been able to trace. It had bothered me for years. A loose, rattling component. I dropped my duffel bag. It landed with a heavy, solid thud on the hardwood floor. The sound was unnervingly final. "What are you doing now?" Cole asked, his voice shaky. He looked pale. "This is insane, Dad. This is insane." I didn't answer him. I knelt. I unzipped the bag. I bypassed the radio. I pulled out my laptop. I stood up. I placed the laptop on the console table, pushing the trophy aside. I opened it. I powered it on. The sound of the small, whirring fan was, to me, a sound of pure reason. I connected to their Wi-Fi. It was, of course, unsecured. "I never understood this," I said, to the room, to myself. I thought it was a random database error. Identity theft, a ghost. I spent years trying to clean this up. I logged into my credit bureau account. I turned the laptop screen so the entire horrified hallway could see it. And I scrolled. I scrolled back, past the years of green, of perfect payments, of high limits, of a score that could buy a building. I scrolled back, to the years I was at Ridgeway. The screen was a sea of red. I pointed to a line. "A credit score of 540, I said, my voice as level as a diagnostician's. I was a full scholarship student. I had no debt. I had no assets. And yet, I had this. I pointed to a cluster of entries. 3 applications for high-interest credit cards, all denied, and this. My finger landed on the unopened account. 1 auto and business loan for $30,000 in default from the Dayton Community Auto and Business Bank. I looked up. I looked at Cole. "I remember the calls," I said. "I was in the lab. I remember a man calling me, screaming at me, telling me I was a deadbeat, that I was going to be sued. I was 19. I reported it as fraud. But they had my social security number. They had my name. It took me 4 years to clear it. 4 years of writing letters, of being denied a student credit card, of being denied an apartment. I lived on a cot in a lab because no one would rent to me, because my credit was destroyed." Lillian's voice was soft, but it cut through the silence. "They used your name, London, to buy that big, black, customized truck Cole was so proud of, the one you were never allowed to ride in. They used your future to pay for his present." The only sound in the hallway was the grandfather clock in the living room, ticking, a slow, merciless metronome. My mother, Patrice, was openly sobbing, a raw, ragged sound of a woman breaking apart. "I didn't know," she choked, her hand clutching her chest. "Gerald, I didn't know." Cole finally looked at me. His face was white, his salesman's confidence completely gone. He looked like a child. I thought Dad handled it," he stammered. "I just signed where he told me. I didn't think it would. I didn't think it would actually affect you, London. I thought it was just paperwork." "I didn't think it would affect you." The final data point, I was not a person. I was just paperwork, a ghost in their system whose name could be used, whose future could be leveraged, and who was not even real enough for it to affect. I looked at my father. He was slumped against the wall, between the trophies and the dining room door. He was no longer a king. He was just an old man, exposed, his system completely, irrevocably, and publicly crashed, his authority, his rage, his entire identity. It was all built on a scaffolding of lies, and Lillian had just pulled the pin. He opened his mouth. He looked at the floor. He closed it. He had no answer. He had no more inputs. He was, for the first time in his life, silent. I felt nothing, not triumph, not even anger, just the quiet, clean click of a diagnostic finally, painfully, completing, system failure, cause, foundational corruption. I turned the laptop back toward me. I closed the credit report. And I opened a folder, the one labeled H&H. "You wanted to know about my little project, Cole," I said. You asked about my barn. I turned the screen back around, but this time, it was not for them. It was for my mother. I want to show you, I said to her, what the paperwork was for. I didn't show them the Forbes article. I showed them the truth. I showed them the before pictures, the cannery, a skeleton, its bones picked clean by the wind, the sea visible through the gaping holes in the floor. I showed them the after, the new steel I-beams, the new roof, the walls, insulated and warm. I showed them Ilya, his face hidden by a welding mask, a shower of orange sparks his only light. I showed them May, her arms covered in sawdust, her smile broad as she raised a 900-year-old beam. I showed them the photos from the Afognak run, the pilot boat, loaded with diesel drums, disappearing into a wall of black snow. I showed them the emails, the real ones, the ones that mattered. The antibiotics arrived. The ventilators are stable. You saved real people. And then, I showed them the dinner, the photo from the Kodiak Bay Journal, the one of the equal table. My mother, Patrice, stopped crying. She took a step forward, away from her husband. Her hand, trembling, reached out and touched the screen. She touched the face of a small, unknown child, a fisherman's daughter, who was laughing. She traced the image of Lillian, who was at the table, holding her fat orange cat. And then, her finger landed on my face. In the picture, I was holding a coffee mug. I was looking at Lillian. I was smiling. My mother looked up from the screen. She looked at me, my real face. "You're smiling," she whispered. It was a revelation, a piece of data she had never seen before, a system she had never known existed. I closed the laptop. The quiet, plastic click was the final sound. I put it back in my duffel bag. I zipped the bag closed. "I don't need your apologies," I said, my voice clear and steady. "They're not a functional input. They're just noise. They're not for me. They're for you." I looked at them all. My father, still slumped. Cole, who looked sick. My mother, who was just watching me, as if for the first time. "I just needed space," I said. "You told me I was just taking it up, so I went and found my own." I shouldered the duffel bag. The radio was heavy. "And then I built some more. For everyone else you left in the corner." I looked at Lillian. She nodded, her eyes shining with a fierce, terrible pride. "Come on, London," she said. "Let's go home. Nora's making stew." She walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cold, clean night air flood the hallway, chasing away the smell of polish and regret. I walked toward it. I turned from the open doorway. The cold, clean Ohio night air was flooding the hallway, pulling the warmth out, clearing the scent of polish and regret. Lillian was by the door, her coat on, waiting. My father was a statue of collapsed rage. My mother was a ruin, weeping into her hands. Cole was just blank, a system that had no inputs for this. I could have left. I should have left, but the diagnostic was not complete. Leaving was an escape. I was not there to escape. I was there to offer a new protocol. I turned, my heavy duffel bag still on my shoulder. I walked past Lillian. I walked past my father, who actually flinched as I passed him. I walked back into the dining room. The room was a disaster scene. Napkins crumpled, wine glasses half full, the heavy, ornate chairs all askew, and at the head, his chair, the throne, slightly pulled back from his sudden, furious exit. I slid the duffel bag off my shoulder. I set it on the glossy, polished surface of the table. The thud was loud in the silence. Patrice, Cole, and Ashley watched me. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck, unsure if I was a rescue boat or a shark. I unzipped the bag. I pulled out the radio, my old friend, the heavy wooden box from the 1950s. Its veneer was peeling, but it was solid. I set it in the very center of the table, right on top of the ruined floral centerpiece. "What is that?" Cole asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "What are you doing now?" "This," I said, "is the first table I ever had. I found the power cord. I looked around. The outlet was by the china cabinet, where I used to sit. Of course it was. I walked over. My movements deliberate. I plugged it in. I returned to the radio. I turned the Bakelite knob. A warm amber light flickered to life. A hiss of static filled the room. A sound more honest than anything that had been said at this table in 30 years. I turned the dial, my fingers knowing the precise frequency by heart. Through the static, a saxophone emerged, a low, smoky, complicated piece of jazz. The sound of my lab, the sound of my garage, the sound of my welding, the sound of harbor and hearth. The music was quiet, but it filled every corner of the room. It was the sound of a different, functioning system. Gerald had drifted back to the doorway, his face a mask of utter confusion. This was a variable he could not compute. I looked at them, my mother, my brother, my father. "This is the last time," I said, my voice clear over the music. "This is the final diagnostic." I placed my hands on the back of a chair. Not my old chair, but one of the main ones. "I have a table 3,000 miles from here. It is round. It has 10 equal chairs, and it is warm. You are all welcome at it. But if you want to sit at this table, we are going to change the rules, right now." I looked at the shell-shocked assembly. "Anyone who wants to try the equal table, sit down, no head, no foot. We sit as a circle. If you do not want to, if you want to keep this system, then this is the last time I will ever be at this table." Silence. The saxophone was the only thing breathing. Gerald sneered. "This is madness. This is my house. I will not be rearranged." "Then you will be alone," Lillian said. She walked past him, her coat still on. She sat down at the table, 2 chairs away from me. She reached into her bag and pulled out the jar of orange marmalade she had brought from Kodiak. She set it down on the table with a firm, solid click. "I choose laughter," she said, to no one in particular. "And I choose this music. It's got a good beat." The first component had seated itself. The next move was the one that mattered. Patrice, my mother, she was standing by the sideboard, her entire body trembling. She was looking at her husband, Gerald, who stood in the doorway, a thundercloud of absolute authority. She was looking at me, at Lillian, at the radio. Her system, her entire life's programming, was in conflict. Obey the authority, survive the anger. But she had seen the pictures. She had seen the smile. She took one, shuddering breath. She did not sit. She walked to the head of the table. She walked to Gerald's chair, the throne, the massive, carved, upholstered chair that defined the room. "Patrice, don't you dare," Gerald warned, his voice low. She put her hands on the back of it. She closed her eyes, and she pulled. It was heavy. The legs made a horrible, screeching, scraping sound on the hardwood floor, a sound of violation. She dragged it, inch by inch, away from the head of the table. She pulled it around the corner, placing it in line with Lillian's chair, making it just another chair, equal to the rest. She had, with one physical act, decapitated the system. She was breathing heavily. She looked at the chair, now just a chair. She looked at her husband. "Sit down, Gerald," she whispered. "Please, sit with us, as one of us." It was the bravest thing I had ever seen her do. For Gerald, it was not an invitation. It was a declaration of war. It was the ultimate betrayal. His wife, his chair. He looked at Patrice. He looked at me. He looked at his mother. "No," he said. The word was dead. Cole had been watching this, his face white. He was the echo. He was the heir apparent. His father had been dethroned. "This is sick," Cole said, his voice shaking. "You come in here. You ruin everything. You attack him. You attack us. Dad, let's go." Cole made his choice. He was the old system. He walked to his father. He put a hand on his shoulder. "We're leaving." Gerald looked at his son, his one loyal component, and he nodded. He turned. His shoulders slumped. The king was exiled. Cole followed him. But the new generation was still there. The two grandchildren, Leo and his sister, had been watching from the hallway, terrified. Now, as their father and grandfather left, Leo broke free. "I want to sit with Aunt London," he yelled. He ran into the room, dragging his little sister by the hand. He scrambled onto the chair next to me. His sister, shy but determined, climbed onto the one next to him. They were seating themselves. We heard the front door open. We heard it slam. A deep, rattling boom that shook the china in the cabinet. And in the silence that followed, the saxophone notes seemed to lift, to become clearer. The room, which had been so full of tension, so cramped with unspoken rules and heavy, patriarchal gravity, suddenly expanded. The air was lighter, the ceiling felt higher. The four of us at the table, and the two empty chairs where the men had been, all sat in this new, open space. Patrice stood by the chair she had moved. She was crying, but this time it was different. It was the hard, painful cry of release, not of suppression. She looked at me. "It's so late," she whispered, pulling out the chair next to Lillian. She sat down. "I am so late, but I want to learn, London. I want to learn how to sit again." I looked at her, my mother, a new component, freshly installed, still booting up. I nodded. Lillian reached over and poured my mother a glass of water. "The first rule, Patrice," she said gently, "is that we don't interrupt, and the second is that you pass the marmalade." We sat, the six of us. The turkey was cold. The gravy had congealed. It did not matter. Patrice went to the kitchen and came back, not with a feast, but with a plate of cookies the children had made, and a bowl of leftover mashed potatoes. We passed the plate. And for the first time, we talked. Leo, the boy, spoke first. He was not interrupted. He told a long, rambling, and very serious story about a video game. His sister, encouraged, told us about her teacher. Lillian told a story, not about the past, not about anger. She told a story about the fat orange cat in Kodiak, Marmalade, and how he had stolen a salmon from a fisherman on the dock. It was a story about gratitude, about the absurd, funny, functioning chaos of life. It was not a story about boasting. My mother, Patrice, listened. Her hands were cupped around a coffee mug. The candlelight from the centerpiece, which was now just a candle and not a symbol of status, lit her face. It lit Lillian's face, etched with wisdom and steel. It lit my face. 3 women, 3 generations, all seated at the same level, learning how to rewire a family, learning how to love a system that was equal, not hierarchical. 1 week later, the scene cut. The gray, flickering light of Ohio was gone. The light in Kodiak, Alaska, was brilliant. It was the cold, sharp, blue-white light of the north, reflected off the ice in the bay. The main hall of Harbor and Hearth was full. It was packed. The blizzard season had started, and the community dinner was in full swing. The sound was a joyful, booming roar, laughter, shouting, music. Nora was at the stove, a queen in her own right. May and Elia were at the round table, arguing over a set of blueprints, both of them laughing. The table was full. Every one of the 10 chairs was taken, and around it, May had, as promised, built more. 3 more tables, all round, all equal, were scattered through the hall. They were also full. Fishermen, nurses, engineers, children, all eating, all talking, all warm. And in the corner, by the door, just as we had always planned, were 3 empty chairs. They were not for overflow. They were not for storage. They were a standing invitation. They were a sign that the system was open. They were ready. I was not at the tables. I was standing at the new, massive picture window that Elia and I had installed, the one that faced the bay. The glass was cold against my forehead. I was watching the ice floes move with the tide. I had a small, square piece of wood in my hand, the piece I had burned the night before I left for Dayton. I turned from the window. I had a hammer and a small nail. I hammered the nail into the wooden frame, right in the center. where the light would hit it every morning. I hung the sign. It was the thesis. It was the new code. It read, "If they tell you you're taking up space, come here. We'll build more tables." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We're so glad you're part of this community. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And please remember to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.